Good. Well, let's get started. David, are you ready? He's muted. I assume he is. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Harold Hommel, and I'll be your host for this evening. I'm a member of the Saanich-Gulf Islands Greens EDA. This is the fifth in a series of events with our leadership contestants put together by 3 BC EDAs, North Island-Powell River, or NIPR, Kelowna-Lake Country, or KLC, and Saanich-Gulf Islands, or SGI. Let me start by acknowledging that I'm located on and live and work on the unceded territory of the Saanich peoples and the other Indigenous groups of the Salish Sea. So, thank you for joining us. I'll go over a few housekeeping issues. The chat is disabled for security reasons. In some previous events with our leadership candidates, there have been racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, and trans homophobic attacks. Not only is the chat disabled, but we will be removing anyone who is disruptive. It's unfortunate that a few negative voices try to disrupt the democratic process. But attacking the democratic process is nothing new. Due to COVID-19, of course, this leadership contest has been conducted largely online, so we will have to play with the cards we've been dealt. We're doing this session a little differently than others have been. The leadership contest is winding down, and so we thought we'd give the contestants a chance to really showcase themselves, so to speak. So while we have prepared questions, we're going to give David 10 to 15 minutes to tell us about who he is as a leader and how his life experience informs his leadership style. So this is a more unstructured format than we had originally planned, but we think it will give members a more holistic view of each candidate. Also, we should let you know that all the events will be recorded for posterity and will be available on YouTube and the EDA's Facebook pages. One other thing, David, on the previous interviews, we asked the leadership hopefuls if they would like to go over the 1 hour limit that had been originally set for the interview. They agreed and answered questions for about a half hour over the original time, and we'd like to extend that opportunity to you as well if you're able to do that. And I just wanted to provide full disclosure. I participated in David's 2019 election bid, but I have not participated in this Green Party leadership contest for David or any of the other contestants. And just moving on, in terms of this first section, we'll give you a warning when we reach 12 minutes, David. So the floor is yours for the next 10 to 15 minutes. You can unmute yourself and tell us why you are the person we should choose as our next leader.
Thanks very much, Harold, and thank you to everybody who put this call together, Megan, Susan, Helena. I really appreciate the work that goes into these calls. I'm coming to you from Saanich, British Columbia on Vancouver Island, the riding of Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke, and this is the traditional territory of the Esquimalt, the Wasanich, the Sauk, the Secwepemc, and the Pacheedaht First Nations. I don't say that lightly or as a matter of routine. My first job in law was working for an Indigenous lawyer in my native Alberta, Willie Littlechild, and we prepared submissions to the United Nations Human Rights Committee in Geneva. And I believe that deep injustices have been done throughout our history to Indigenous people, and it's one of the issues that I hold near and dear to my heart. We're going to be rolling out an Indigenous justice paper next Friday, and it's just one of the examples of the things that I care about deeply. I live here in Saanich with my spouse, Annemiek, and my daughter, Rebecca, who's going into grade 12 here in Esquimalt High School. We feel very privileged. Annemiek is planning to run for the BC Greens. There's a rumor that Horgan might trigger an election on Tuesday, John Horgan, our premier. If that happens, it's going to be a very busy household here. I'm going to lay out three things briefly in this introduction to you. My vision for Canada, my vision for the Green Party, and then what I have to offer, which directly answers your question, Harold. I'm very keen on the questions and answers, and I'm happy to go as long as the last questioner wants to stay on. I think the ability to be responsive, to talk to people face to face is so important. If you go to my website, davidmerner.com, you'll see my phone number there, my cell number. I answer my own phone, so anybody who doesn't get to ask a question is welcome to call me as well. Starting with my vision for Canada. I'd love to see a Canada that's a leader again. We were once a leader. We were seen around the world as a moral leader. Lester Pearson won a Nobel Peace Prize for our work with the peacekeepers in the Middle East. But we've lost our way. And under the Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau governments, we can no longer win a seat on our United Nations Security Council. We're no longer seen as a moral leader around the world. And I'd especially like to see Canada become a leader on the climate emergency, because this is a global problem. And unless we change the trajectory of our planet and what's happening on our planet, I don't see us making the changes globally that are essential to addressing the climate emergency. And for that to happen, I believe, to change this trajectory, I believe Canada has to be a leader in addressing climate change at home. We need to be a country that can show the way, because we are the 4th largest exporter of fossil fuel energy in the world. We're the country that subsidizes fossil fuels more than any other country in the G7 countries per capita. We are not setting the example. We have contributed way more than our fair share to greenhouse gas emissions globally. And what we need to do as a country is to turn this around, to get off fossil fuels, onto renewables. And the Green Party has a fantastic plan on this, is to build an east, west, north electrical grid powered by renewables that would transform our economy. And this transformation has to happen without leaving anyone behind. In other words, as Greens, we fight for social justice. It's critical to us. And that's what we should campaign on in the next election. I'm a real fan of the guaranteed livable income and see that as one of our top 3 priorities in the next election, right after the climate emergency. But to get there, I believe that we need Greens in the House of Commons, because if we don't have more Greens in the House of Commons holding the government to account, we're not going to get this change in direction. And I see us as building into a place where perhaps, like the BC Greens, the federal Greens hold the balance of power in the House of Commons. And then we can influence the course of our government, influence the course of our country, and ideally influence the course of our planet. But to win seats in the House of Commons, we need to transform ourselves as a party. I've crossed the country twice. One of the reasons for going across the country is to meet people where they live and just listen to people. And what I've heard on my 2 cross-country trips is that Greens are very, very disappointed in how our party performed in the 2019 election. They feel that we're disorganized. They feel that we are divided. They feel that we are not a serious political party. And I'm not sugarcoating this, but I'm not exaggerating. I attended a meeting in Montreal in November, and I've never seen a group of 50 candidates and campaign managers so angry. You know, they said we had 500,000 people marching in the streets of Montreal with Greta Thunberg, and we could not win a single seat in Quebec. There's something wrong, and our party is not acting like a political party. We're acting like a group of disorganized activists, and we need deep change. This was all in French. They'd asked me to come and give my views on the national campaign from a BC perspective. J'aimerais dire à tous les francophones ici qu'on a besoin d'un leader qui est complètement bilingue dès la première journée. Quelqu'un qui peut gagner les débats des chefs et gagner sur le terrain les votes de nos concitoyens. I think it's essential that we have a bilingual leader who on day one can win leaders' debates, who can win the votes of people on their doorsteps in Quebec, in New Brunswick, in Eastern Ontario, in San Boniface, Manitoba. If we choose a leader who's learning on the job, learning French on the job, we're putting ourselves behind the other parties. The other thing I'll say that's unique about me is that I can actually win the seat I ran in 2019. None of the other leadership candidates can win the seats they ran in. Many of them didn't run for us at all. And I think it's very important for us because we've seen with Elizabeth May how hard it is to win a seat for the leader. It took tons of resources, tons of time, and a lot of energy before Elizabeth won in Saanich-Gulf Islands. She's turned out to be one of the best MPs in Canadian history, but winning that seat was very difficult. Let's not create a problem for ourselves by electing a leader who can't win a seat. We came second in this riding, thanks to folks like Harold and Cynthia and many others who are on this call, my mom and dad. I see Francis Lippman on here, and I'm leaving some out. But I want to say thank you to all of you who worked so hard in this riding. We had 200 volunteers, fantastic volunteers. We had 2,000 lawn signs out, and we got 26% of the vote on election day. And many of us were very disappointed with that result because the polling had been positive up until about the last 2 weeks. So we need someone who can win a seat. We need somebody who's perfectly bilingual, and we need somebody who understands the Green Party in their bones, because as I've said, we're a party that is not fully functional. And if you don't understand the Green Party, you're not going to understand the parts of the party that need to be fixed and the parts of the party that actually work really well. The parts of our party that need to be fixed are the deep divisions we have in our federal council. As many of you know, we lost our president last month, the divisions between caucus and the federal council, and just the general internal stress. We put a huge amount of stress on our volunteers and on our candidates during election time, and we don't have the kind of supports for our frontline EDAs that should be there. I'm a real fan of empowering the front lines of our party, empowering our EDAs, providing the resources that are essential to becoming a competent party in 338 ridings. And on my travels across Canada, I'd say we have a competent party in about 15, maybe 20 ridings. And that's just not good enough. We need to build. I'm a builder. It's one of the things I offer. I've been the president of 3 EDAs over the last 30 years. I know what it takes to build from the ground up. And I'm also somebody who loves to listen. And my plan as leader is to hold bi-weekly meetings every 2 weeks with our EDA leaders, our chief executive officers, and our candidates, nominated candidates, and really listen and problem solve together. Because this is not a huge problem. Getting organized on the ground, the other 3 major parties do it. We can do it too. But it takes focus, and it takes leadership, and it takes somebody who's actually campaigned before, which it takes somebody who really understands how to inspire people to volunteer, to recruit good candidates, good local candidates, to get out there and inspire people to run for us. So that's the kind of leadership I offer. I'm a builder. I'm a listener. I don't need to be center stage at every stage. I'm delighted if others are out there. And this leads me to my last point before I conclude. I would love it to be the uniter of these 8 fantastic candidates we have in this race. We are running in the most diverse group of people ever to run for a political party leadership in Canadian history. It's a wonderful group. Each one of them has different skills. But I believe I'm the only one who's able to pull them together into a fantastic team, a team of rivals. Any of you who are leaders can Google team of rivals, and you'll see Abraham Lincoln brought in all his political competitors into a fantastic United States cabinet, probably the best cabinet in US history. And I see that as a model for us in this leadership race. Let's bring the talent together. Can you imagine if we had one person reaching out to Black Lives Matter, another reaching out to the medical community in Canada, another person reaching out to the gay community in Canada? These are people who would be fantastic parts of a fully functional team. And that's what I'd like to set up on day 1 as leader of the Green Party. Last thing I'll say is if you go to davidmerner.com, you'll see more details there about me and my background. As I said, you can call me on my cell phone if I don't get to your questions on this call. And there are 2 very important buttons on that website. One is donate, and the other is volunteer. We're 3 weeks away from having a new leader in our party. And this is when the phone calling really starts and the hard work really, really takes off. We have a fantastic team, and we'd love you to join it as a volunteer or as a donor, or ideally as both. No amount is too small. Thank you very much for hearing me out. I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Okay, well, Thank you very much, David. Sounds like you were talking about a green dream team. Is that?
I love that. That has a rhyme to it.
Well, we are going to open things up for people to send in questions. And while we're waiting for that to happen, I've got a couple of things ready here. So I know that you're a strong advocate of electoral reform, specifically proportional representation. So I'm wondering, what steps would you take to help bring this about in our electoral system, especially considering that we're not in power?
You're right, Harold. I'm a lifelong advocate. Ever since I was a university student at the University of Alberta, I've advocated for proportional representation. I served on the board of Fair Vote Canada for 7 years. I knocked on thousands of doors and handed out thousands of flyers in my riding. I'm proud to say that Esquimalt Saanich was one of the ridings in the referendum that voted yes for proportional representation. And I've been very dedicated to this topic. Specifically, to answer your question about what I would do, I would make a proportional representation. If our shadow cabinet and party members agreed, I would make proportional representation one of the essential elements of a deal if we had the balance of power in the next government in Ottawa. So just as the BC Greens signed a supply and confidence agreement, we would negotiate a similar agreement, and proportional representation would be one of 3 key elements. The other one, the first one, and the most important one, would be a clear, time-limited climate action plan with specific targets on greenhouse gas reductions and other key indicators. The second one, for me, would be the guaranteed livable income. I think that's essential for getting us out of the pandemic and also ensuring a universal safety net for all Canadians. But the third element would be proportional representation. And I'm a deep believer that without fairness in our democratic system, it's going to be very, very hard for Canada to make the changes we need, not just to address the pandemic, but especially to address the climate emergency. Thanks for the question, Harold.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'll go to Megan. Do you have any questions ready at the moment? Or Susan, depending on who's ready.
Yes, I've got one here, Harold.
Great.
This is a question from David Brewster, and he would like to know how you would build a unified team, given that there are some problems that you've identified, and what would you do to deal with whatever these issues are that have been causing you some concern?
Thank you for your question, David. We do have a very diverse group of leadership candidates, and my career, my lifelong career I've written 2 master's theses on negotiation. I worked as a lawyer my last 10 years in the government of British Columbia here in Victoria. My title was Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Office. I'm a real fan of early resolution, mediation, and finding common interests. And I really believe we do have a common interest in this group of 8 leadership candidates. And we all believe that the climate change issues, the global climate emergency, is our #1 priority as a party. We all believe that we need to win seats in the House of Commons in order to be a credible force in Canadian politics. I think we all agree that we're not a credible force in Canadian politics right now, and we won't be if we remain divided. We won't be if we make Palestine-Israel our #1 issue in debates, which it seems to be right now. We won't be a united group if we focus on this tyranny of small differences, which seems to be a serious problem inside the Green Party. And we won't be a credible force in Canadian politics if we focus on the negativity, which we see so much on social media pages. So my approach is to name the problems, as I've done just now, and say, let's solve them together. Let's also, in a much more positive way, and this is especially with the Canadian public, let's put forward a really positive vision of where we're going to go as a party together, a vision that inspires people inside the party and outside. And so I always say, we are a social justice party. We're way more progressive than the NDP. The NDP came after us on fighting for equal marriage. They came way after us on national pharmacare. They still haven't adopted our fantastic platform on a guaranteed livable income. It looks like the Liberals might do it before the NDP. So I always say we are the most progressive party in Canadian politics, and let's be proud of it. But we're also the party of fiscal responsibility. And we can balance those two things. We've done it since 1983, since we were founded. And we are not an ideological party. We're a party based on science. We're not an identity-based party. A core value of ours is respecting the full diversity of Canadians, not putting one identity above another. It's the full diversity of Canadians that we stand for. So let's pull together around our core values. Let's pull together around a really positive message for the future of our party. And I think that's the kind of leadership we need to pull folks together. Some people may not see those things as our primary interests. They may have other interests with their careers, and that's perfectly fine. Let's keep them on as friends. They may not become deputy leader or co-chairs of our shadow cabinet or even part of our shadow cabinet. That would be their choice. But we have a lot to offer. And that's what I would do, is encourage people to stay, to build our party and save the future of human civilization. What could be a better mission than that? And that's how I would approach that problem, David.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to follow up on that with a question, and then we'll go to Helena. I know she has a question. So having to do with COVID-19 and all the events that have happened because of it, we now, of course, have a fiscal deficit that's in part due to that. What would your priorities be for a realistic socioeconomic recovery plan?
So again, my view is that we have to be the party of a positive, strong vision on how to address the climate emergency, how to get our economy rolling again out of the pandemic, and how to leave nobody behind as we do all this. And our message should be about how we're going to grow away from a fossil fuel-based economy onto a renewable resource-based economy. And we should be talking about success stories in this, real success stories that are underway right now. The Sauk First Nation in this riding here, Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, is entirely off diesel generators. They're powering their reserve on solar energy. You look at the town of Raymond, Alberta, entirely solar in its municipal infrastructure. Hinton, Alberta is leading Canada in geothermal energy. We have all these examples around our country. If you go south of Lethbridge, you can't drive for a mile without seeing a windmill. We know the engineering is there. We know the science is there. What's lacking is political will. We need the political will to focus on this shift to renewables, an east-west-north electrical grid, connecting up our rural areas through broadband access and internet, so that young people don't have to leave home. They don't have to leave rural areas and move into the cities. I have a cousin who's a welder on the TMX pipeline. And we had this conversation in August as I was traveling across the country. He would love it if his kids didn't have to be welders like him. It's very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter. And what he'd love is if they could connect to the global economy from Wetaskiwin, Alberta, the farm outside Wetaskiwin, rather than having to move to Calgary or Edmonton for jobs, or to move to the countryside to start welding on pipelines. So people are looking for a hopeful transformation of our economy, and what the Green Party has to do in a positive, practical, specific way is lay it out. And we've always done that. We've costed out our promises. We know exactly how much they've cost. We know where the revenues are coming from. And we put our fiscal plans to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the only political party to do that consistently. And we get a review from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. In 2019, we said we'll balance the budget in 5 years. And to answer the question specifically, I think that's too short a period. Now that we've had so much spending already, we should shift to an 8 to 10 year period where we will balance our budget, and we'll need to do the numbers and make sure the revenues match up with the costs, and we have a serious plan to put to Canadians. Thanks for the question.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on that just because what you've mentioned mostly is the economic recovery plan. How about the social part of it? Because a lot of groups have been affected by this pandemic in a different way.
You know who has the best message on our social recovery and the linkages between healthcare and the pandemic and the global climate emergency is Courtney Howard. She has a great message. She's a doctor herself, and she has a great message on how these things are all interconnected. And she says we have to deal with the causes of the pandemic, which are global habitat loss and our relationship to wild animals. And we have to be prepared to address the next pandemic. And she talks about how we should prepare, including the production of essential materials here in Canada, as opposed to depending on China for those materials. I think she has the best message around this. And the social side of this, I think the Greens are already on top of it. The guaranteed livable income I see as core to our whole platform. It's a way of ensuring that the least well off in our country have a safety net. And the people who are least well off in our country are likely to put that money straight back into our economy. And that'll help get the economy rolling again. A key thing is to keep liquidity flowing through our economy. The other thing I'd say is the free tuition program that we campaigned on in 2019 is a part of this social justice agenda. Great inequalities have built up in our society, and a key solution to those inequalities is free education for trade school, college, and university. That's a longer term plan, but if we really believe in a Canada where there's equality of opportunity, if we're going to solve the serious inequalities we see building in our economy, then the free tuition platform is another key element of it. The other thing is the fight for human rights. In the last 5 years of my career here at the Ministry of Attorney General, I was responsible for the Human Rights Code of British Columbia and for human rights operations in the government of British Columbia. And we need to focus on the equality agenda. As a lawyer in government, I worked on transgender protections, amendments to our Human Rights Code, which passed through the legislature in a unanimous vote. And that's the kind of thing we should, as Greens federally, be fighting for as well. As I mentioned earlier, we were first of all the major parties on equal marriage, and we need to be continuing to be first to fight for equality in Canada. And with a team of rivals, of 8 fantastic candidates working together, I think we'll be able to reach out to our natural partners, Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, Wet'suwet'en and Strong, in addition to our traditional partners like the Friday Climate Strikers or Extinction Rebellion or the Sierra Clubs. So let's create this movement of movements which is really built around a strong social justice agenda.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I'm going to go to Helena, I know, who has a question that she picked up from one of the participants.
So, linking back to your initial opening statements, this question comes in from Mina Lee Johnstone. And she says, so in these statements, you mentioned that you are a unifier. And you've also mentioned that winning support in Quebec is vital to the success of the Green Party. So 2 of the other candidates from Quebec have identified as eco-socialists. If one of them won or came second to you, how would you unify that?
What I've said to Miriam Haddad and to Dimitri Lascaris is I'm not an eco-socialist or a socialist, but I believe that the Green Party of Canada has been the most socially progressive party consistently in our political history in Canada, and we must remain that. And as leader, I will make sure we remain that way. I've also said to them very honestly that I think that the rhetoric, the language of eco-socialism and socialism is going to alienate many, many voters and will reduce our opportunity of winning seats. And the reason that's so important is if we don't win seats, then we can't influence the government in Ottawa in a credible way. We won't have the power we need to influence the government. That means I sincerely believe the government's not going to change its course, the course of investing more and more into fossil fuels, buying pipelines, subsidizing the fossil fuel companies. And so we won't achieve the change in Canada we need to have an impact on the planet. So I think it's really very important for Greens to think about how will we win seats? And if we run under the leadership of an eco-socialist or a socialist, is that going to enable us to win seats, or will it hurt us? I've crossed the country twice. It's clear to me it will hurt us really badly as a party if a socialist or eco-socialist is our leader. We will be seen as lacking credibility. We will not be taken seriously in the media, and we will lose many members of our party who will say it's just not worth it. We do not want to be associated with an ideology. We're a party of diversity. It's one of our 6 core values. We are not aligned with one single ideology, whether it's eco-socialism or socialism. We welcome everybody in from all different parts of the political spectrum. And to narrow ourselves down to a very small proportion of Canadian activists would be, I think, suicidal for the Green Party of Canada. That's what I've said to them in nicer terms than that, because I want to get on with them. I want them to know we are going to be the most progressive party in Canadian politics. We have been and will stay there. But I'm going to ask them also to pay attention to the rhetoric we use, because it could be a serious detriment to our party. And I think actually we can get on that basis. I think they will agree. Look, David, you won. You were saying this throughout your campaign, that we have to be careful of language. And the other thing is, if they don't like it, they won't come in. That would be unfortunate, because they have huge talent and I think potential to help us out. But if they can't agree on the leadership approach, that's their decision.
Thank you, David. Susan, I'll go to you. Do you have something ready for David?
Yes, and this is coming from Cheryl. What are your thoughts around the 5G issue?
Cheryl, my thoughts are driven by science. And the latest science says that there are risks that are unexplored yet on 5G. Several cantons in Switzerland, for example, and several states in the European Union have said they need more scientific evidence. The evidence I've seen suggests that it is safe, but we are a party of science, and we need to listen to the latest science, peer-reviewed science, not pop science on Facebook, and that should be what determines our position as a Green Party. The latest science, the best science, and it is actually one of these divisive issues inside the Greens. There are many people who are very concerned about 5G. It's similar to nuclear power. There are divisions within the Green Party on nuclear. Some people are saying it's essential it's an essential renewable energy. Others are saying it's a terrible danger to humanity. And what we should do in addressing these very divisive issues inside the Green Party, is listen to the best science and follow our members on our assessment of the best science. Thanks for the question.
Great. We'll go to Helena. I think she has another question from one of our participants.
So, as you've also mentioned, you have described yourself as a good listener, and that you are keen on conducting a listening campaign, and that you believe that that is something that has very strongly set the Greens apart so far, and that should continue. So this question comes in from Gordon Cornwall, and it says, Greens want to prove that they are different from other parties, and many are keen on a listening campaign. But you have been relying heavily on robocalls. Will this come across as politics as usual?
Gordon, thanks for your question. I think many of the leadership candidates have been relying on robocalls. And in fact, every Wednesday we have a telephone town hall where we use robocalls to reach out to people, and then they can pick up the phone on Wednesdays and have a phone conversation in a large group, ask me questions and so on. So robocalls are a way of facilitating the listening, hearing what people's concerns are. And I know that some people see it as old style politics. The problem we faced in the Green Party, though, is we have many green values. Others are relying on mailouts. Our campaign decided that wasn't very green, killing all the trees, all the greenhouse gas emissions for transporting the mailouts to people's homes So we decided we wouldn't go with paper mailouts. And we know that face-to-face is very difficult. I've crossed the country twice, reaching out to people from British Columbia all the way to the Quebec Atlantic border. Never made it to Atlantic Canada because of their COVID restrictions. But it's very hard to reach out to people because we haven't been given people's emails. We've been given addresses and phone numbers. So we're using the phone numbers as a way to reach out to the 35,000 people who are now part of our party, Gordon. And without robocalls, we wouldn't be able to reach them. And I wouldn't be able to hear from them. So I think it's the right way to go. It is unfortunate that we're campaigning in COVID times where our ability to reach out to Greens has really been restricted.
Okay, yeah, I guess that was a tough decision to make for your campaign. I want to switch over to a BC issue, and just wanted to ask, what do you think the federal government should be doing about the salmon and herring fisheries in BC?
The federal government should be implementing the recommendations of the Cohen Commission. And the Cohen Commission study is excellent, and the vast majority of their recommendations have not yet been implemented. And we are facing a total disaster on the West Coast with salmon, as many people on this call know better than I do. We're looking at salmon going the same way as the East Coast cod. And we are looking at a mass species extinction and decades of recovery time if the federal government continues to delay. And if I had to say the one most important thing that I would support, that is taking all the fish farms out of the water, requiring them to be on land. Washington State has moved in this direction. We've been dragging our feet in Canada, and we need to take urgent action now to prevent the extinction of these species.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'll move on to Susan.
Thanks, Harold. From BC now to another part of the country. This question comes from Paul de Groot, and he says, I'm concerned about a party that literally elects people only on the edges of Canada. How would you structure an effective campaign in Ontario? And maybe you could add Quebec in there as well.
Paul, I'm very concerned about that as well. It's why I focused so ruthlessly, maybe that's the wrong word, on winning seats. We need to win seats across our country. And I've heard from so many candidates who said, you know, I was so thrilled to be a Green candidate. And then at our first meeting after my nomination, I asked, how much money do we have in the bank? And the answer was $40. And okay, well, how many volunteers do we have? Well, there's 3 of us who usually show up to the meetings. And the discouragement across our country, because we're just not organized on the ground. People aren't doing the things we need to do between elections. We try and wrap things up, you know, 2 months, 3 months. I started knocking on doors in December of 2018 and knocked all the way through till October of 2019. And I hadn't started early enough, even in my campaign, and we came a close second. So I hear your pain, Paul, in your question. And to get organized, the first thing we need to do is get organized on the ground so that riding associations have the tools they need to campaign between elections, to do the hard work. Barack Obama says politics is 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration. And so we need that hard work done between elections, raising money, going out to all the volunteers. Everybody on this call, you should say to your EDA, have we called the sign people yet? The people who took lawn signs on their lawns. Have we invited them to become members? Have we invited them to attend our executive meetings? If your EDA hasn't done that yet, say, I'd love to get on the phone and contact all the people who took lawn signs. That's job number 1. But people just aren't doing it. And people often don't know that that's job number 1. So what we need is a leader who, like I said earlier, will be on the phone every 2 weeks with the leaders in the EDA saying, how's it going? Are you making your phone calls? Are we building up the bank account? Are we bringing in new members? If we can do that in Ontario, in Quebec, we will be starting to become a competent political party. Paul, the other part of this is we need a leader who will get out there on the ground and recruit candidates that reflect the full diversity of our country. Candidates who are credible locally, 338 candidates who look like Canada and who represent Canada. We also need a leader who will cross the country. I'm the only candidate in this race who's campaigned from Atlantic Canada to BC. And in this campaign, in this leadership campaign, I'm the only candidate who's crossed the country twice. And the only candidate who's had a college and university tour focusing on bringing in young Greens, because that's where a lot of energy lies that we haven't tapped into. This Friday, we'll be announcing our Indigenous Justice Circle, where we have a Leaders Indigenous Justice Advisory Circle. So we can start building relationships with Indigenous people, another group of Canadians that very rarely votes. Elizabeth May is right when she says, we need to tap into young people, Indigenous people, people of color, people who don't feel included in our political system in Canada. That's how we start winning seats across Canada, especially in Quebec and New Brunswick. It's essential to have a leader who's perfectly bilingual on day one, and not just with an academic French. I have a unique kind of French. It's called hockey French. I played hockey on a lot of teams in Gatineau and Hull and Ottawa, and I'm not a great hockey player. So when you're the only Anglophone on a hockey team, and you're not a great hockey player, you learn a lot of terminology that's very useful for politics, especially politics in Quebec, where people play politics with their elbows very high. So that's the kind of leader we need. You need a leader who can help the party to build. You need a leader who can inspire people to get involved, but you also need frontline EDAs that are fully empowered and that have the resources they need to succeed. If we do both of those things, we're going to change Canadian politics.
Great, thank you, David. That brings me to a question that we had prepared, because you talked about young people. So as a leader, how will you change the Green Party's approach to young people so that they're not only feeling safe, but also feel like they're heard and taken seriously as an equal voice?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the only candidate in this race who had a specific campaign from University of Victoria all the way to University of Montreal and McGill Greens, visiting people where they live, listening to the young Greens in those university clubs, hearing what their priorities are, talking about the program we set up in Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke. It's easy to talk about this stuff, but it's much harder to do it. And what we did in 2019 in Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke is we invited young Greens to come to our riding, and we promised them three things. We'll give you a billet, so you have a place to sleep. We promise you breakfast in the morning at your billet. And then if you come into the campaign office, the fridge will always be full. And we would like to learn from you. You know way more about social media than most of us here in the Riding Association in Esquimalt Saanich-Sooke. And we'll help you with things you may never have done before, like knocking on doors or making phone calls to recruit new members or to identify the vote. So we had this fantastic team of 30 young Greens. Many were coming here for 3-4 weeks. Many stayed 3-4 months. Some even flew back. They went to school and then flew back for the week before Election Day. We created a fantastic sense of community and team building here in our riding. And it was, I think, one of the most successful parts of our campaign. We need to scale this up. They designed the program. They called it Paint the Island Green, which I love. And so let's scale up. Let's call it Paint Canada Green or whatever they want. It has to be designed by young people. I'd love it if our youth council would lead on this. And let's scale this up and systematically bring in young people into the party. And I always say, you know, I'm 58 years old. An old guy like me isn't the best person to reach out to young people. The best people to reach out to young people are other young people. So let's empower our young volunteers, young Greens from coast to coast to coast to be our ambassadors to other young people. And by the way, it's the same thing. People who are brave sometimes say, we don't need another sort of older white male as the leader of a major political party in Canada. And I say, I agree. If we had somebody who could build our party, then that person should be the leader. And I tell the story of Kim Campbell. Kim Campbell, I worked with Kim Campbell in the Department of Justice, the best Minister of Justice, some say, in Canadian history. When she went to become Prime Minister, it was a total disaster. She lost the majority. They went down to 2 seats, the Conservatives did. And it was because she had a very divided party, She had no support from the Prime Minister's office. She had a huge problem on her hands that she just couldn't solve. And what I'm saying is, for people who say we must have a woman leader, I say, look at Kim Campbell, brilliant woman, fantastic person as Justice Minister, but not properly supported as Prime Minister. And what we need in a leader right now is somebody who can sort out the mess I described earlier, build our party, so that the next leader of the party can become the Prime Minister, can make the breakthrough, because we have a solid foundation and we have a next leader with the full range of experience that's essential to really succeeding in Canadian politics. Bit of a long answer. It covers more than just the youth issue, but I also think it's important to cover this other issue about what kind of leader we need. My view is we need a leader who can build the party and get us into position to having the next Prime Minister be the Green Party leader.
Great, thank you. I'll check in with Susan to see if she has something ready.
I just have to unmute first. Yes, I do, Harold. This one comes from Elizabeth Donaldson, and she's wondering, how might we assist in disengaging from strong lobby groups and the power of the USA, so become more truly independent, especially in public policy?
Thank you for your question, Susan. That's a tough question because it's so deeply embedded in our government, this connection to lobbyists like the SNC-Lavalin lobbyists and this lockstep foreign policy with the United States, which we've seen since Stephen Harper's days. So it is a difficult question. One of the stories I love to tell the most, and one of the stories that makes me most proud to be a Green, is the story of Elizabeth May as the only person who voted against the bombing of Libya in the House of Commons. I just love that story. And I love to tell it, especially to NDP friends, because the NDP often claim to be peace advocates, just like the Greens. But then I say to them, well, what happened in the House of Commons when the entire NDP caucus had to vote to bomb Libya? Why did that happen when you claim the NDP are a party of peace and justice and international human rights? And I think one of the things we can do in our party is hold the other parties to account. And we must stay true to our 6 core values. And we must demonstrate day in, day out that we live by those values and that we respect those values. And it's not just in how we vote on critical votes in the House of Commons, it's also how we behave towards each other and how we organize our party, whether we truly are a participatory democracy or not. And if we walk the talk, if we behave in a way that's consistent with our own values, then I think we get the kind of credibility with Canadians that will enable us to win seats and also enable us to hold government to account on the influence of lobbyists, on our lockstep foreign policy with the United States. And we need to look at ourselves first. We need to grow as a party first. We need to be consistent every day with our own values, including on social media and what we say on Facebook. And then what we can do is convince Canadians that we are a different kind of political party. We're not like the NDP. We're not like the Liberals and Conservatives. We're different. And I think that's a key advantage for us. And if we can campaign that way, if we can behave that way in our daily lives as party members, I think we could break through and then hold government to account on the influence of lobbyists and on our lockstep foreign policy.
Great. Thanks a lot. I think Megan is now ready with a question. Megan, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Harold. Yes, there's a question about legalization versus decriminalization of non-prescription drugs. So are you advocating legalization or decriminalization?
I'm advocating legalization, specifically the Portugal model of legalization of all drugs. We have to take the drugs out of the hands of the criminal gangs. We have to put the drugs into the hands of our health professionals. And that's the whole solution. I worked in the justice system for 28 years. I worked on justice transformation projects for the last 15 years. And the critical problem facing our police, our courts, is that we are completely mishandling this, quote, war on drugs, unquote. It's swamping our prosecutors, it's swamping our police, it's swamping our courts, and we need to get drug policy out of the justice system and entirely into the health system. This is a tragedy. More people in British Columbia are dying every day from the opioid crisis, more than the pandemic, and we're not taking it seriously enough. This is a human tragedy, and we know the solution. Portugal, Switzerland, the Netherlands, they've all identified elements of the solution. All that's lacking is political will. And so I'm a firm believer that let's look around the world at best practices and adopt those as quickly as possible. The only thing that's missing here is political will. And it really is very disappointing, especially with the provincial NDP, who could be doing so much more, that they have really dropped the ball on the opioid crisis. Just follow Dr. Henry's, Dr. Bonnie Henry's recommendations. She's written a fantastic report on this. We know what we need to do. The recommendations are all there. Just do it. Thank you.
So excuse me, Harold, if I could just follow up.
Good.
So you're saying legalization, but so in your perception then, what are the drawbacks of decriminalizing as opposed to legalizing?
It doesn't go far enough. Portugal has said, we need to get all people with addictions issues into the health system. We need them to connect. And so when we're dispensing the drugs they need so much, we're also dispensing advice. We're giving them social services. We're connecting them to housing. This is a very complex problem, and it's essential to have all the solutions line up. And sometimes with people who are addicted, they're not going to avail themselves of the services. That's fine. They'll be back the next day for their fix, and a nurse practitioner will be handing it out. And at the same time, they'll be there with others who are getting the services they need. We need a holistic solution, and small steps are not going to get us to a holistic solution. And this has been the problem with drug policy in Canada. It's the tyranny of small steps when what we need is deep change. So I'm a fan of legalization. Portugal's proven that it works, and let's go with the proven solution as opposed to the small steps that only deal with a small part of the problem.
Okay. Thank you. I'm a little curious about that one, so I just want to follow up a little bit. You say that we see all the steps and evidence of how it can be done, yet it isn't being done. Why do you think there is such hesitation to get on with some of the solutions that seem to be available?
That's a very good question. I think a lot of it is political will. And it's the same problem we face with the climate emergency. These things aren't easy. There will be many conservatives across Canada who say legalization isn't the solution, the war on drugs should continue. But with the right political leadership, we can move public opinion forward. That's what happened in Portugal. Strong political leadership. Actually, Mina Lee will be pleased to hear it was a socialist government moving that forward. And Mina Lee, I say that as a humorous comment, and also as an example of where we should take our ideas from wherever they work, no matter what the government's ideology or background. Where the ideas work, we should adopt them. And I know this from personal experience, Harold. I worked on justice transformation for 10 years, and what we did to make the biggest change in Canadian justice history here in BC was to look around the world. We look at the Quebec Small Claims Court, where they don't allow lawyers to come in. Lawyers have to ask for permission. We looked at the Queensland Civil Resolution Tribunal, where they solve all small claims and all residential tenancy battles and all strata disputes. And we looked to the United States, to eBay and PayPal, where they resolve 60 million disputes online every year. We put all these ideas together. We didn't have an original thought, of course. Our original thought was to pull all these other brilliant ideas together. And we created something called the Civil Resolution Tribunal here in BC. The Civil Resolution Tribunal is the only part of BC's justice system that did not shut down during the pandemic. because it's so well designed, it's online, you can come into it through your smartphone or your home computer, and it's now resolving almost all small claims, almost all motor vehicle accident disputes, and all strata disputes, almost all strata disputes in British Columbia. People were flying in from Australia, Singapore, the United Kingdom to see, how did BC crack the code on justice transformation in the civil justice system? No other country in the world has done this. And the reason we did it is we looked for the best practices around the world, and we know where the best practices on drug policy are. They're in the Netherlands, they're in Switzerland, and especially they're in Portugal. So let's go there, take their best ideas and adopt them here. And let's fight for them, even if with hardcore conservatives who believe in the war on drugs, we take them on and we show them the evidence. And eventually we win.
Okay, great. Megan, are you ready with a question from the participants?
Yes, I can be. And this refers back to the discussion around eco-socialists. And within our own chat, we have a mini representation of that particular divide. So one person in the chat is saying she agrees that using the term eco-socialist will alienate many people and will lose votes. And another person is saying the eco-socialists have brought in many new members. So if that's true, that many new members in the Green Party right now are eco-socialists, then perhaps the unifying job is going to be much harder once the new leader is chosen. But how and this relates to my own question as well, because for me, the 6 core principles represent the best of any ism ideology. And so I have my own question around why are we using terms like eco-socialist? And if we had a government that was actually formed on the 6 core principles, wouldn't that represent all the best values of eco-socialism? So it is a kind of a divisive question. And if you could just expand on that a little more vis-a-vis the Green Party itself. Thank you.
What I've said to Miriam and Dimitri already, Miriam Haddad and Dimitri Lascaris, is if I'm the leader, we won't be using that terminology, but I guarantee we will be the most progressive social justice party in Canadian politics. And I believe we always have been. You know, the NDP have been way behind us on guaranteed livable income. They still don't campaign on free tuition, right? We are way, way more progressive than the NDP, and we always have been, and we'll continue to be that way. But we also need discipline in our language. And we saw this with Bernie Sanders. I thought Bernie Sanders was head and shoulders above the other candidates in the Democratic nomination race earlier this year. But he was saddled with this terminology of being a democratic socialist. And I think that's what did him in the end. People united against that terminology, that kind of language, even though he was inspiring to young people. He had a broad coalition, raised more money than anybody else in that race. But I do think terminology matters in politics, and we will alienate many Green Party members if we adopt the language, many more than the new eco-socialists who have come in to support Dimitri and Marian. So what I would say to them is we want you to stay. We really value your vision. And I also say the eco-socialist analysis is right in so many ways. We cannot have constant growth capitalism in a finite planet. We can't have the levels of materialism, especially in countries like Canada, that we've had. We have to change the way we act as consumers and as citizens. Our government needs to stop measuring success by GDP growth. We need to start measuring well-being like New Zealand's doing and other countries are doing. So I agree so much with many of their core ideas, but I've been in politics for 30 years as a volunteer. And I think most eco-socialists will recognize this too. We have to be careful about how we communicate with Canadians. We're already seen by the majority of Canadians as a very fringe party that they would never vote for. And we will certainly firm up that vision in their minds if we use the terminology of eco-socialism. So Let's work together because we're united by the substance. We agree on the analysis around our capitalist economy needing to shift. We agree that the climate emergency is the #1 priority. We agree we have to end mass species extinction. So let's focus on the big areas of agreement and not get caught up in these small differences in terminology. It's too easy to focus on the small differences. Let's unite around the big issues.
Great. Well, thank you. Speaking of big issues, one of the things that we've run into here in BC and in a few of the other provinces as well, the major cities, is affordable housing. What steps do you think the government should take on this issue, David?
I hope I don't lose too many votes in saying this, but I actually think our government has a pretty solid national housing strategy. The only thing they haven't done is put any money behind it. So typical of the Trudeau Liberals, they have this wonderful rhetoric. And if only they would do what they said they would do. If you Google National Housing Strategy Canada, you can see there's the elements there of a huge number of great solutions. I would add to it, I would say that they don't focus on cooperative housing enough. I think that's a huge solution, especially cooperative housing aimed at seniors and enabling seniors to live in dignity. But overall, their national housing strategy actually makes a lot of sense, but they're not putting money into it. We need to put money back into the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. That used to be a real force in Canadian housing policy, especially with cooperative housing, and it no longer is. So to me, the answer is relatively simple. It's not about policy, it's more about money and investment. It has to happen in cooperation with Indigenous, municipal, and provincial governments. There has to be coordination there. But the key thing is using the government's spending power to help solve this housing crisis across Canada.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll go to Susan. I'm sure you must have something there.
Yes, you mentioned earlier, David, that you felt very confident that you could win your seat. And Donna would like you to speak a little bit more to that, just why you feel that way.
Whoops. I think you're muted, David.
Are you able
to hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. So Donna, we got 26% of the vote last time. We came a close second in our riding. And we had a few things I think that went wrong in our 2019 campaign, which if I'm leader, I will work very, very hard to make sure they don't go wrong again. One is we weren't ready, and we should have been ready for the nasty NDP attack strategy. We knew it was coming. They did it in 2015 too, but we just weren't ready to respond. I've spoken with our national campaign director, Jonathan Dickey, about why we had no response ready, why we weren't able to respond. And he said, by that point in the campaign, there were 10 days left, roughly, maybe 2 weeks. And we'd just been beaten up on so many things. We were putting out fires all over the place. People don't know this, but we lost 21 candidates out of 338 in the last campaign because of various things like Facebook posts or comments on abortion or things that just weren't aligned with the Green Party values. And so our campaign team, our national campaign team, was firefighting the whole time. And they didn't have a strong strategy to deal with something that was entirely predictable, which was the NDP attacks, which CTV Truth Tracker called grossly misleading. So that was one of the problems. Another is our performance of our national campaign. Riding campaigns, the political science data is pretty clear, can basically determine the outcome of 5, maybe 7. Some people say 10, I don't agree. I think it's 5 to 7% of the vote. We need a national campaign that's fully functional for candidates like me, not to see our vote plummet in the last 2 weeks. And that's what happened in Victoria. That's what happened in Esquimalt, Saanich-Gulf. It happened in Kitchener, where we could have won. London Centre, we could have won. There were many seats where we came close. Guelph is another example where we could have won. But when the national campaign isn't firing on all cylinders, when we start off the campaign talking about racists in New Brunswick for 3 days, then we end up talking about a separatist running for us in Quebec for 2 or 3 days. and we talk about abortion for 5 or 6 days when it's clear that we're a pro-choice party, we have a problem. And if you don't have a strong, competent, clear, and especially positive message that connects with Canadians, then we will end up losing seats like mine and Russell Coy's in Victoria, and Mike Maurice's seat in London, which another one we should have won. So I'm not looking back at this with any bitterness. This is politics. We're a party that's learning. We're a party that's growing. And if I'm the leader, I'm very committed to a positive, inspiring message that will ensure that in seats like Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke, and Victoria, and Kitchener-Waterloo, and Guelph, that we have the kind of support from Canadians when they go into the ballot box and they're thinking, is the Green Party credible? Is the leader of the Green Party credible? Have they run a good campaign? Do I like my local candidate? When they ask themselves all these questions, the answer should be, yes, I'm going to vote Green.
Okay, great. Just a quick sort of continuation of that. Is money an aspect of that as well, where the Greens suffered sort of at the end?
I don't think so, especially in my riding. We had, I just heard from my financial agent a couple of days ago, we're putting $50,000 back into the riding here. And, we, especially in our key ridings, we're able to fund very high performing campaigns. In ridings where we have high performing candidates who are good at fundraising, it's not a problem. I mentioned Mike Maurice earlier. He raised $200,000 in a riding that had never gone green before. And the other thing is, Elizabeth May is a magical fundraiser. I don't know if any of you have seen the reverse auction she does. She raised for my riding in 20 minutes, $10,000. It was unbelievable. And we organized a couple events like that. And I really hope Elizabeth is going to continue to play a really strong role in our riding, not just as a fundraiser, but so long as Elizabeth's there, and I'm looking forward to learning from Elizabeth. I think fundraising will be a key issue for us. And by the way, it's a key issue on my leadership campaign if anyone wants to donate. But more seriously, I think the key thing for us is to have organization on the ground and a leader who has a credible, positive, consistent message in both official languages. I see fundraising as one of the core issues, but it's not the key problem because we do have very good fundraisers in our party. We just don't have organization on the ground and consistent, positive, credible, strong message on a national campaign led by a leader who really connects with Canadians.
Great. Okay. Just looking at the clock here, we're at 11 minutes after 5. You're still okay to keep going?
I'm happy to go until the last person is on, signs off.
Good. Excellent. Megan, go to you if you have a question.
I do. I don't think there are any new questions in the chat unless we've missed one. But I do have a question, David. And it relates to the question just a couple of minutes ago about why you're so confident you can win your riding. If you become leader, are you going to stay in Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke and run there? And so then you wouldn't be running for a seat in Parliament until the next federal election, or will you move to wherever there might be a seat comes open first?
My preference would be to run for the nomination here, hopefully win the nomination and then go on to be the candidate. But that won't just be a decision on my shoulders. This will be a team decision. It'll depend a lot on the polling. It'll depend also about building. I'd be very happy to run in another riding if a by-election came up, it looked like a winnable riding, or it even looked like a riding where if I ran in the riding, we would build for next time and it could be a winnable riding the next time. But my home is here and I have a real love for this part of the country. It's not the most convenient place to be. Elizabeth told me about her travels and how hard it is on her. And I know it's hard. I've done it twice across the country in car, in long drives, and she's taken the train and plane so many times herself. But I do think there's a real advantage to having a leader from Vancouver Island. I think it'll help us to win seats on Vancouver Island. I think one of the reasons we broke through in the Nanaimo Ladysmith was because Elizabeth was a Vancouver Island leader in Green. She was able to campaign there for Paul, especially in the by-election. I went up 7 times, including spending 4 days there before election day in the Nanaimo Ladysmith. And I think that the island, Vancouver Island, is a real potential growth area for us. I also believe New Brunswick is a huge potential growth area for us, especially if we have a leader who can speak hockey French. And Quebec as well is critical, in Eastern Ontario. Maybe there's some potential there. Peterborough, Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, all the outside the 416 area code around, especially to the west and north of Toronto, I think huge potential there as well. So we need a leader who is ready to travel the country, but my preference would be to run here in Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke again, because I am very confident that we came close last time. We had 200 volunteers. Next time we'll have 400. We raised a lot of money. We'll raise more money again, and maybe even be able to share it with other ridings, because it's easier to raise money when you're a leader. Please don't tell my campaign manager that the idea is to share the money. But I do think if we have a winner that wins a seat, it makes it so much easier. I won't have to stay here all the time in the campaign because this is a relatively winnable seat. I'll be able to campaign nationally. And like I said earlier, none of the other leadership candidates can say that. None of them, they came 3rd or 4th in their ridings. They can't win where they ran. And many didn't even run at all for us in 2019. So I really think it's an asset to have a leader who can win.
And if I could just follow up, Harold, is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Glenn Murray has been elected numerous times, and is a successful politician in that sense. So, so I feel like it's not quite accurate to say that none of the other leadership contestants have that experience.
That's not what I said, Megan. I said none of the other candidates ran in a 2019 campaign where they could win, and some didn't even run for us at all. Glenn falls into the second category of people who didn't run for us at all.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
And I'm very careful never to make negative comments about the other candidates, because I want them to be part of this team of rivals. And Glenn would be a key person on the team. He has huge experience. I mentioned earlier, he'd be a fantastic person to reach out to the gay community. He has a fantastic policy mind. Anybody who takes a look at his guaranteed livable income policy, it's amazing. He's done great work in this leadership campaign on policy, and I see him as a potentially key ally, and I would never sort of attack him. Although it is true, he hasn't, I think he joined the Greens in December or January, he's never run for us.
Okay, thank you. I was just gonna follow up on that a little bit, and what I was going to add was, you mentioned the fact that being a leader is really helpful in terms of running and getting money together. And certainly, I'm the CEO of the SGI EDA, and we already have our money set aside for the next campaign. There's not many EDAs that can do something like that. So we're very fortunate, and certainly there is something to that of having the leader in a riding and building up the goodwill like Elizabeth did in Saanich-Gulf Islands. Have to agree with that.
And I think another thing about it, and Harold and you're the perfect example of this as an individual, is you're able to send your volunteers elsewhere because you're relatively confident you're going to win in SGI. And it was a huge help for me, and also for Russell Coy and Victoria, to have the SGI volunteers helping out, which is fantastic. And I would love to expand on that model. SGI has shown the way. And especially for ESS, Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke volunteers, if we're confident, if the polling on 338canada.com and our internal party polling is showing we're comfortably going to win in this riding, I'd love to put our team onto phoning. I'm going to be phoning into New Brunswick tomorrow. It's election day in New Brunswick. I'm going to be helping out one of the candidates who could win there. And I think that's a model, is using our phone teams across Canada to help out in, say, Guelph or London Centre or one of the New Brunswick ridings where we could win in the next federal election if they have proper phone team support.
Right, and I'll add to you this whole venture that we're doing right now, and I'll mention Megan because she was the big organizer in this, is having about 5 different EDAs working together to produce this has really been good for the people involved in it, because we've been able to get to know other people, had some fun, and appreciate the, what you can do when you work together. So it really does help.
I totally agree on that. One of the things that we have, which is interesting in the Green Party, is we have pockets of expertise on how to run EDAs, how to run campaigns. And then in other parts of our country, we're very, very thin on the ground. And so I love this concept of twinning ridings or teaming up ridings. I also love the concept of regional campaigning. And Harold, you guys in SGI have shown the way on this, including your Twitter teams that are tweeting out, retweeting Elizabeth's posts. That has a national impact. And I love it when we can identify the talent in our party, really empower the talented people to support each other and work across riding boundaries, across provincial boundaries. I hope you don't mind, I just have a short story. I went to Saskatchewan for their leadership convention and met Naomi Hunter, who's now the new leader of the Green Party. And I said to her, I'm off to Winnipeg tomorrow. Why don't you join me? We'll go recruit Manitoba Greens to come and help you in your provincial election. That election, by the way, is on right now in Saskatchewan. So we jumped in the car together and we drove to Winnipeg. And halfway there, we stopped at Moosomin, Saskatchewan and filled up with gas. And we saw on the main street, they had a local newspaper, the Moosomin Planet. So we went in and introduced Naomi to the editors. They interviewed her for an hour and a half. She got a front page story on the story. And then that night we went to Winnipeg. She had 2 events in Winnipeg recruiting Manitoba Greens to help her out. And it was a fantastic day on the Green Party campaign trail. And this idea of working together, reaching out to local media, reaching out to allies in other parts of the country to help us out, all that I think encapsulates in one day what we need to have happen every day in the Green Party federally. You're reaching out to local media, creating teams of Greens who help each other out.
Okay, thank you. We're getting, well, it's 20 after 5. I think there's maybe one more question, fairly serious one that I have here that we could go to, and then we'll wrap up. What will you do as a leader to move our country towards action on reconciliation with First Nations, and specifically the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report?
That is a really serious question. And as I said earlier at the start of my presentation, I went into law to deal with the injustices that have been done throughout the centuries to Indigenous people in Canada and that are ongoing right now. Many people don't know that as many children are being taken away from Indigenous families today as during the height of the residential school crisis. 50% of kids in care in BC are Indigenous kids, and that's 4% of our population are providing 50% of the kids in care in BC. It's a shocking statistic, and in Manitoba, the statistic is even higher. So we're facing an ongoing tragedy, and one of the key elements of this really terrible tragedy has been a consistent government inaction, and the inaction on the recommendations from the reports on missing and murdered Indigenous women, both provincial reports and federal reports, is really shocking. And again, this comes back to me to holding governments to account, holding the government's feet to the fire on these issues. And if we don't have more Greens in the House of Commons focusing on this, it's just not going to happen. Trudeau's gap between rhetoric and action in this area has been massive. And you look at the number of boil water advisories that are still in place in Indigenous communities, it's shocking. I'm going to lead by example on this. On Friday, we'll be releasing a paper on the creation of an Indigenous leaders advisory circle for my leadership campaign. If I win the leadership, I'm going to continue with this Indigenous advisor circle to review all Green Party positions, policy positions, all the work of the shadow cabinet, and also looking at restructuring our party internally so that we guarantee 2 seats on our federal council for Indigenous people, I really think that unless we integrate Indigenous ways of looking at our country, at our policy, at our party structures itself, we're not going to connect with Indigenous people. This is a group we should be connecting with. Our interests coincide almost perfectly on our social justice agenda and especially on our environmental agenda. And that would be one of my personal areas of interest. Party members set policy, but leaders can do a lot to reach out to groups who are underrepresented, to make sure our party represents the full diversity of Canada. And Indigenous justice, Indigenous candidate recruitment, and volunteer recruitment are areas that I'm personally very committed to. And once we do that, we'll become credible in terms of holding the government's feet to the fire on its failure to implement so many of the recommendations in the Missing and Murdered Women and Girls reports. Thanks for the question.
Okay, well, thank you. Would you like to make a closing statement of about 2 minutes, David?
I'd love to do that. First of all, I'll say thank you again to Megan and Susan and Harold and everybody else. I think I may have missed a few names. That's always the risk of naming names. And I'll just finish with this, the unique things that I offer in this race. First of all, I can win the seat I ran in. We got 26% of the vote, as we discussed earlier. We had 2,000 lawn signs out, 200 volunteers, and as leader, I can build on that and we'll win that seat. Secondly, I'm the only candidate in the race who speaks hockey French. I explained that earlier. We need somebody who can actually connect with voters on doorsteps in New Brunswick, in Quebec. On a besoin d'un leader qui est capable, dès la première journée, de gagner les débats des chefs au Québec et avoir une présence crédible sur la scène nationale avec les médias francophones. C'est essentiel. Third, I'm the only person in this race who's campaigned from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia, from the Atlantic to the Pacific on winning green campaigns. I campaigned for Megan Mitten in New Brunswick. She won by 11 votes. Every volunteer in that campaign could say, if it wasn't for me, she might not have won. And now she's in the legislature in New Brunswick, and apparently she's going to win with a larger majority this time, which is great. What we need is somebody who understands the Green Party in their bones, understands our great strengths. Our volunteers are amazing. So many scientists and engineers and doctors and young people who are dedicated to saving the planet. So let's build on our fantastic volunteers, but let's also call out and fix the culture in our party of negativity, especially on social media, the culture of division. And let's not agree that we are a party bounded by one single ideology or one or two identities. We're a party of diversity, diversity of opinion and diversity of people, and that includes everybody. I'm the candidate who's most clearly campaigning on needing to bridge these gaps, pull people together, and form a unity team, a team of rivals, 8 fantastic candidates for this leadership race who should be able to work together to save the planet, change the direction of our country, and build the Green Party. If you're interested in joining this leadership campaign, go to davidmerner.com, click on volunteer, or click on donate. I'd love to have your help. If you didn't get to ask a question in this call, call me on my cell phone. It's listed on our website, davidmerner.com. I'd be delighted to chat. And thank you again to everybody for coming on a Sunday afternoon. It's so great to see so many familiar faces, many from South Vancouver Island, and I really appreciate you taking the time to hear me out.
Great. Well, thank you very much, David, for running for the leadership of the Green Party and for also joining us tonight. In closing, just want to say a few words about the GPC ballot, specifically the importance of ranking all or at least most of your choices. It is a ranked ballot, and many people think it's sufficient to rank only your first or second choice. However, in a close race, and I think we can safely say this is a close race, it becomes even more important to go beyond just your first, second, or even third choice. So in a ranked ballot, listing your choices in order of preference means that your voice counts in all stages of the vote count. And as Anita Nickerson from Fairvote Canada has said, that the ranking provides valuable information to the new leader and party membership about what the party membership values beyond those first choice preferences. And it's a way for them to then decide how they unite the party and reach out to the different camps after the election. Thank you all for joining us. It's wonderful to see the interest in this leadership race. The next event in this series is with Amita Kuttner, and that's tomorrow, Monday, September 14th at 7 p.m. And that's going to be hosted by North Island's Powell River Greens EDA. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you again for joining us.